Hey guys, how are you all doing? I hope you all are fine. Today I am back with a very interesting Reddit confession story, so let's start. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting in a dimly lit living room at 3 in the morning, staring at a burner phone and wondering if I was about to become a criminal just to save someone I loved. It's funny how fast your life can shift from being a normal 24-year-old guy with a boring office job to someone who's calculating the physics of a heavy blunt object, all because of one desperate, shaking phone call. My friend, Maya, is the kind of person who doesn't even like to send back a wrong order at a restaurant. Yet there she was on my doorstep, looking like she'd just seen her own ghost, clutching her phone like it was a live grenade. The situation was as ugly as it was simple, the kind of digital age nightmare you read about on Reddit but never expect to land in your lap. Maya had been dating this guy, Tyler, for about 6 months, and on the surface, he seemed like your average, slightly immature 20-year-old who spent too much time on Discord and not enough time looking for a job. I never liked him, but I kept my mouth shut because she seemed happy enough, and I didn't want to be that overprotective guy friend who ruins things. But then they broke up 3 weeks ago, and Tyler decided that if he couldn't have her, he was going to own her. He had a video, something private they'd made when things were supposedly good, and he wasn't just threatening to post it. He was treating her like an ATM, demanding $2,000 by the end of the week, or he'd send it to her parents, her boss, and post the link on her college's alumni Facebook group. And the worst part, the part that made my blood absolutely boil, was that he told her he'd consider deleting it if she sent him a new video, something even more explicit. It was pure, distilled evil, wrapped in the insecurity of a boy who couldn't handle being dumped. When Maya finally told me everything, sitting on my couch with a blanket wrapped around her despite it being 80 degrees outside, I felt this cold, sharp clarity wash over me. I've lived in this city my whole life, worked a decent job in logistics, and generally stayed out of trouble, but seeing her tremble like that changed something in my brain. I looked at the screenshots of his texts, vile, disgusting things where he called her names I won't even repeat, and I knew right then that we weren't going to the police, at least not yet. Tyler was smart enough to know that if the police got involved, he'd just hit send before they could grab his devices, and once that stuff is on the internet, it's there forever. He says he's coming to my apartment tomorrow if I don't have the first 500, Maya whispered, her voice cracking as she stared at the floor. I reached out and took the phone from her hand, my fingers brushing against hers, noticing how ice-cold she was. I told her she was staying at my place, that I'd sleep on the couch and she could take the bedroom, and that under no circumstances was she to reply to him again. I needed to think, and I needed to do it without her panic clouding my judgment, because I knew Tyler. He was a coward, but cowards are the most dangerous people when they feel they have leverage. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I spent hours scrolling through Tyler's social media, looking for any crack in his armor, any piece of information I could use to flip the script. He lived in a crappy basement apartment in a suburb about 20 minutes away, worked part-time at a tech repair shop, and spent the rest of his time gaming. He felt untouchable because he was behind a screen, but he was forgetting that I knew exactly where that screen was located. As the sun started to peek through the blinds, I realized that if I wanted to stop this, I couldn't just be a shoulder to cry on. I had to become the person he was most afraid of, and I had to do it before Maya's life was ruined by a click of a button. The next morning was a blur of caffeine and heavy silence. Maya was a shell of herself, flinching every time my phone buzzed, even if it was just a notification for a work email. I told her I had a plan, which was a partial lie, because the plan was still mostly just a ball of white-hot rage in my chest. I told her to stay inside, lock the doors, and don't answer for anyone but me. I drove over to Tyler's neighborhood, just to see the layout, to feel the reality of the situation. It was a quiet, unassuming street, the kind of place where neighbors notice a strange car, so I parked a block away and just watched his house. Around noon, I saw him. He walked out onto the porch to grab a delivery bag, looking exactly like the kid I remembered, slouched shoulders, messy hair, wearing a stained hoodie. It was jarring to see how unremarkable he looked, considering the amount of power he was currently wielding over Maya's life. He looked back at his phone, a smirk playing on his lips, and I knew he was probably checking to see if she'd begged him for mercy yet. Seeing that smirk did something to me. It made the fear go away and replaced it with a very calm, very dangerous sense of purpose. I wasn't just going to get the video back. I was going to make sure Tyler never had the courage to look at a woman again. I headed back to my place, my mind racing through the logistics of what I was about to do. I needed to get into his apartment, and I needed to get his phone and his laptop. But more than that, I needed to make sure he didn't have any cloud backups or hidden drives. It was a massive risk, but the alternative was watching my best friend's life crumble while I did nothing. When I got home, Maya was sitting exactly where I'd left her, her eyes red and puffy. She looked at me, searching for some kind of hope, and for the first time in 24 hours, I gave her a small, tight smile. "It's going to be okay," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was saying it for her or for me. "I'm going to handle it tonight, and by tomorrow, he's never going to bother you again." She started to protest, asking me what I was going to do, telling me it wasn't worth me getting in trouble, but I just held up a hand. I explained that I was going to meet him, tell him I had the money, and then, well, I didn't tell her the rest. I didn't tell her about the heavy mag light I'd tucked into my car door, or the way I'd practiced a very specific, very intimidating tone of voice in the rearview mirror. I was stepping into a version of myself I didn't particularly like, but for Maya, I would have burned the whole city down. I spent the afternoon preparing, setting the stage for a confrontation that I knew would either end this nightmare or make it a whole lot worse. The sun began to set, casting long, jagged shadows across my living room, and I felt the adrenaline start to kick in, a steady thrum in my veins that told me there was no turning back now. The drive to Tyler's place that evening felt like it took a lifetime, yet it was over in a heartbeat. I had the $500 in an envelope, real cash, because I needed him to believe I was playing ball. I pulled up to the curb a few houses down and sat there for a minute, just breathing. The streetlights were flickering on, and the suburban quiet felt heavy, almost suffocating. I checked my pocket one last time for the burner phone I'd bought, making sure I had the recording app ready to go. This wasn't just about getting the footage. It was about getting a confession that would keep him quiet for the rest of his life. I walked up to his door and knocked, a firm, rhythmic sound that felt far louder than it should have. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, and Tyler stood there, peering through the gap with a look of smug curiosity. When he saw it was me and not Maya, his expression shifted to a mix of annoyance and bravado. "What are you doing here, man?" he asked, trying to sound tough, but failing to hide the slight tremor in his voice. I didn't say anything at first. I just held up the envelope. His eyes lit up, that greedy, pathetic spark that told me I had him exactly where I wanted him. He let me in, the apartment smelling of stale pizza and unwashed laundry. It was the typical cave of a 20-year-old with no direction, wires snaking everywhere and empty energy drink cans littering the coffee table. He sat down on the edge of a stained sofa, gesturing for me to sit opposite him. "Where's Maya?" he asked, trying to sound casual as he reached for the envelope. I pulled it back slightly, keeping it just out of his reach. "She's not coming, Tyler. You're dealing with me now," I said, my voice low and steady. He laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, what? Are you her bodyguard now? That's cute. But unless you want everyone she knows to see her in 4K, I suggest you hand over the cash and tell her to send the rest by Friday." I looked around the room, spotting his laptop on the desk and his phone sitting right next to him on the couch. I needed both, but I needed him to give them to me willingly, or at least be too scared to stop me. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, making myself look as big as possible in that cramped space. "Here's how this is going to go, Tyler. I'm going to give you this money, and you're going to log into every account you have, Google Drive, iCloud, Mega, whatever, and you're going to delete everything. And then, you're going to give me the phone and the laptop so I can make sure they're clean." He scoffed, leaning back and crossing his arms. "You're joking, right? Why would I do that? I have all the leverage here. You give me the money, and maybe I don't post the first half of the video tonight. That's the deal." I felt the anger flare up, but I kept it under wraps, letting it simmer. "Leverage is a funny thing," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my own phone, showing him the recording screen. "I've been recording since I walked in. I have you on tape admitting to the extortion, admitting to the blackmail, and mentioning the video. In this state, that's a felony. A long one. You think you're ruining her life? I'll have you in a cell before the sun comes up." The color drained from his face so fast, it was almost comical. He looked at the phone, then back at me, his mouth hanging open slightly. You can't do that," he stammered, his bravado vanishing like smoke in a breeze. "I'll just send it right now. I'll do it." He lunged for his phone, but I was faster. I stood up and planted a hand on his chest, shoving him back into the sofa with enough force to let him know I wasn't playing. I grabbed his phone and stepped back, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Try it," I dared him, my voice dropping an octave. "Go ahead and try to get past me to that laptop. See what happens." For a moment, we just stood there, the tension in the room so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Tyler was breathing hard, his eyes darting between me and the door, realizing for the first time that he was physically outmatched and legally cornered. He started to cry, actual, pathetic tears of a bully who'd finally been punched back. "Please, man, don't go to the cops," he whined, his voice cracking. I was just mad, okay? She broke my heart. I wasn't really gonna do it. I didn't buy a word of it. I'd seen the texts. I knew exactly how much malice was in his heart. I forced him to sit at the desk and log into his accounts. It took 2 hours of meticulous searching, watching him delete folder after folder, checking the recently deleted bins, and scouring his cloud history. I made him hand over 2 external hard drives he'd hidden in a shoebox, and I watched his face crumble as I wiped those too. I was thorough, driven by a cold, clinical need to protect Maya from every possible angle. Every time he tried to complain or make an excuse, I just tapped the burner phone in my pocket, reminding him of the recording. By the time we were done, he was a total wreck, shaking and pale, looking every bit the small, insignificant person he actually was. I took his laptop and his phone, putting them into my bag. "I'm taking these," I said, ignoring his protests about how he needed them for school or work. "I'll have a friend who's good with tech go through these one last time to make sure nothing is hidden in a partition. If they're clean, you'll get them back in a week. If not, well, you know where you're going." I walked to the door, the envelope of money still in my hand. I looked at it, then looked at him. I threw the envelope onto the floor at his feet. "Take the money, Tyler. Use it to move out of this city. Because if I ever see your face within a mile of Maya again, I won't be bringing a recording app. I'll be bringing a shovel." I walked out into the cool night air, the weight of the laptop bag on my shoulder feeling like a trophy. My adrenaline was still spiking, my hands slightly shaking as I got into my car. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. But as I started the engine, a dark thought crossed my mind. What if he had another copy? What if he'd sent it to a friend? The victory felt hollow for a second, the paranoia of the digital age creeping back in. I drove away, my mind already spinning with the next steps, knowing that while I'd won the battle, the war for Maya's peace of mind was only just beginning. I needed to get these devices to someone I could trust, and I needed to do it before Tyler had a chance to regain his nerve. The next 48 hours were a blur of tension and technical deep dives. I took the devices to a guy I knew from college, a brilliant, somewhat paranoid coder named Elias who lived in a high-rise downtown. I explained the situation, not the whole truth, but enough for him to know it was a matter of life and death. He spent a day and a half stripping those drives down to the bare metal, looking for hidden partitions, encrypted vaults, or scheduled uploads. I stayed at his place, drinking way too much coffee and staring out the window, waiting for the verdict. Maya was still at my apartment, and I'd been calling her every few hours just to hear her voice, to make sure she was still holding it together. Elias finally leaned back from his monitors on the second evening, his eyes red-rimmed but satisfied. "Okay, look," he said, turning a screen toward me. The kid was sloppy. He had 3 different backups on cloud services I've already nuked, and he had a hidden folder labeled taxes on the laptop that was full of, well, you know, I've wiped it all. I've also installed a little gift on his OS. If he ever tries to log into those specific cloud accounts or access those file paths again, I'll get an alert, and his system will basically brick itself. I felt a massive weight lift off my chest, a physical sensation of relief that almost made me dizzy. It was over. Truly, technically over. I drove back to my apartment, the laptop and phone sitting in the passenger seat. I felt like a different person than the one who had left 3 days ago. I'd crossed lines I never thought I'd even approach, but seeing the skyline of the city, I didn't feel any regret. I felt a strange, quiet pride. When I walked through my front door, the smell of actual food hit me. Maya had cooked dinner. She was standing in the kitchen, looking exhausted but more present than I'd seen her in weeks. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, and I just nodded. "It's gone, Maya. All of it. He's got nothing left." She didn't scream or celebrate. She just sat down at the small dining table and cried, the kind of deep, soul-cleansing sobs that come after a long period of terror. I sat with her, not saying anything, just letting her process the fact that her life wasn't going to end because of a mistake she made at 20. We sat there for a long time, the dinner getting cold, the silence of the apartment feeling safe for the first time. Eventually, she wiped her eyes and looked at the laptop bag. "What happens now?" she asked softly. I told her I was going to drop the stuff back at Tyler's porch that night, and then we were going to block him on everything and never speak his name again. I did exactly that. I drove back to Tyler's suburb at midnight, left his devices in a box on his doorstep with a final note that simply said, "We're watching." I didn't see him, and I didn't want to. I hoped he was terrified. I hoped he'd spend every day for the next year wondering if the police were going to knock on his door, because even though I hadn't turned over the recording yet, he didn't know that. I wanted him to live in the same state of fear he'd put Maya in, a slow-burning anxiety that would hopefully teach him a lesson he'd never forget. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. Maya moved out of her apartment a month later, finding a place closer to her office in a building with better security. We started hanging out more, not as a victim and a savior, but as two people who had been through a war together. She started seeing a therapist to deal with the trauma of the betrayal, and slowly, the light came back into her eyes. She started laughing at my stupid jokes again, started planning for the future, started living like a 22-year-old should. But for me, things were a bit different. I still find myself checking the locks on my doors 3 times before I go to bed. I still get a spike of adrenaline whenever a stranger lingers too long near my car. I learned that I'm capable of things I didn't think I was, and that realization is a double-edged sword. I saved her, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat, but I lost a bit of my own innocence in the process. I realized how fragile our reputations are in this digital world, how easily one person's malice can override another person's entire history. A few months later, Maya and I were sitting on a pier, watching the sun set over the water. She looked at me and said, "You know, I never thank you properly. I don't think I could have survived that without you." I looked out at the orange and purple sky, feeling the breeze on my face. "You would have," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. "But you shouldn't have had to." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for a moment, the world felt balanced again. We don't talk about Tyler anymore, and as far as we know, he disappeared into the digital ether, a ghost of a bad memory. But every now and then, when I see a burner phone in a convenience store, I think about that recording I still have tucked away in a safe deposit box. Just in case. Because in this world, you never really know when the past might try to hit upload again.